Hello, everyone out there watching. Thank you so much for joining us on yet another wonderful Working in Theater panel session, hosted by myself, LJ from Maroon Arts and Culture, in partnership with Center Theater Group. We're so excited to have you join us on another wonderful Friday afternoon session. Today, I'm really excited because for the first time in the series, I actually already know both of our panelists ahead of time. And I'm really thinking that we're going to get some good perspectives and get some good information. So before we get into it, really quickly, I just want to remind everyone that we do have open captioning available. So if you are in need of a closed caption experience, we have a link for that. And the open captioning is supported in part by the California Arts Council, a state agency, and the National Arts Disability Center at the University of California in Los Angeles. So thank you to them for allowing that level of accessibility to be possible. And I'd also just like to acknowledge that that Center Theater Group and Maroon Arts and Culture are both based in Southern California, which is the ancestral lands of the Tonga people. Also, before we do a convening, I like to call on an ancestor to give me health and strength and focus. So today I'm calling on, who am I calling on today? Today, I think I'll call on Dr. Barbara Ann Tier. No. Today, I'll call on my grandmother. I'll call on my great grandmother, chosen name Khadija Akmal. So hopefully, she can give me the strength and the focus that I need for today. Feel free, if you are joining us on via YouTube, to let us know where you are joining us from. What lands are you watching our program from? And if there's an ancestor that you would like to bring into the conversation, go ahead and shout them out in the chat as well. Love to hear who you are calling on for strength today. Today, we are joined by two amazing panelists. The first is the founder and artistic director of Critical Mass Performance Group. Her name is Nancy Keystone. Give her a round of applause at home. I'll just assume that you all are clapping. And the second is David Mack with Invertigo Dance Company. So did I say that right, David? Invertigo Dance Company.
Theater.
Great. Theater. Vertigo Dance Theater. Yes, because it's not just the dance, y'all telling stories too. Important distinction. Wonderful. So both Nancy and David are people who have given me wonderful advice as I continue to grow Maroon Arts and Culture. Those of you who have watched us over these past few weeks know that, like many of you out there, I am working on building something so that I too can have a long-lasting career in the arts. And so as Maroon Arts and Culture has come together, these are both two people that I have turned to for some advice. So we'll start with some introductions. Let's start with David. Will you tell us a little bit about yourself and about the organization you work for?
Sure. Thanks so much, LJ, and great to be in the same space with you, Nancy, and thanks so much for doing this. So yes, I'm David Mack. You can call me Dave Mack, and I'm executive director of Invertigo Dance Theater, as LJ mentioned. This is a contemporary dance company based in Culver City, doing dance throughout Los Angeles. We were in the middle of a national tour before the pandemic came down upon us, of a show called Formula and Fairy Tales about the life of Alan Turing, father of computer science, cracked the Enigma code in World War II, and was also persecuted for being gay. So there's very strong LGBTQ justice themes in the piece. And most of the work that we do at Invertigo supports social justice issues. That went to Florida, University of Florida in February. So we made it right before the March shutdowns, but we are looking forward to touring that in North Carolina in 2022. The company also had a Dancing Through Parkinson's program that supports people with Parkinson's through dance classes. We had sites throughout the county, including at the Wallace Annenberg Performing Arts Center. Those sites, of course, were closed down, but we've turned that into virtual dance classes that we do on a weekly basis through Zoom. So that's my life at Invertigo. And my other hat is I am the founder and CEO of my own passion project startup called Artist Magnet that supports artists through social networking, professional resumes, and now Zoom conversations on a quarterly basis. So yeah, that's me. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to put the link for Artist Magnet in the comments too. So if you're an artist, if you're working in the arts world, go ahead and open up a profile. It's a networking opportunity for people to come together and get the work done. Nancy, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so honored to have been asked to be here, and great to be with David. And I'm gonna soak up that information and use it. Um, I am the founding artistic director of Critical Mass Performance Group, which is an ensemble, collaborative ensemble in Los Angeles. It began out of an independent project at UCLA in 1985. And we work on a project by project basis. We began doing adaptations of classic plays, and then starting around the year 1998, we started making our own devised work. And a lot of what we do has to do with history and subverting what we know. There's a big social justice component in it. We do a lot of outreach to communities, and we do those are kind of our big productions, but we do a lot of smaller things that are like more interactive salons, almost more kind of visual art oriented. So we do a mixture of things, and we work all over the city in different spaces. And I think that's it for now. We'll talk more later.
Let me unmute myself. Wonderful. So the reason why I wanted to ask both Nancy and David here today is because, as we've been discussing over the past few weeks, there are a lot of paths to creating a career for yourself in the arts. If you're an individual artist and you want to produce your own work, or maybe you just want to get with a group of friends and work on a project by project basis, or if you're wanting to get into arts administration as a long-term career plan, and working within that field in a couple of different areas. So here, today's panel, we have kind of a representation of different size organizations. And so today we'll talk about what it's like behind the scenes in these different size organizations. So maybe you all can start to think about where you can get in, where you fit in. With Maroon Arts and Culture, we are only a year and a half old. And so we're still very new. I'm the only full-time employee at the organization. And then the people who help me out are contractors. They're freelancers, technically according to the IRS. And but really, they just mostly volunteer their time because they believe in me and they believe in the project. And so I think I'd like to hear from each of you about the size of your organization. In terms of number of actual employees, and if you have any freelancers that you bring in, and then also budget, like what's your annual budget? So for Maroon Arts and Culture, I'm the only full-time employee. I have 3 people that are on a 1099 basis, although I hardly ever pay them. They're mostly volunteer. And our annual budget last year, for the year that we're currently in right now, is like $5,000 because everything's virtual, and that happened before our season started. But if I were to be able to do everything that I wanted to do in the 21-22 season, I would need about $60,000. So I will claim that as my annual budget. Nancy, can you tell us a little bit about Critical Mass? You got to unmute yourself, Nancy. I do that.
Sorry. What's the international sign for unmute? What did I just feel like? Sorry. Yes. We work on a project by project basis, and we work over long periods of time developing a single project. So we could work, the last project we did was like an 8-year project. A couple, every once in a while we'll do something that's a few months, but very rare. So, so that's kind of the structure of it. I am the only actual employee. And I am the producer, director, company manager, caterer, toilet cleaner. And then we have, depending on the project, I would say between 5 and 25 freelancers who come on per project. It just depends on the size of the cast that we're working with and the needs of the piece. And then our annual budget also ranges from, if we're not producing, it could be a few $1,000s to about $65,000. We also partner with different larger organizations like Center Theater Group, who has produced a couple of our pieces. And so when we go there, then it's not our budget, but the budget of our piece is able to expand because we're able to work with people who can provide other resources. So we're extremely fortunate in that respect.
And Nancy, how long has Critical Mass Performance Group been in existence? When did you start?
1980. I put it at 1985, but I would say shortly thereafter. But we did a project. It came out of UCLA, out of an independent project that we did, and those people that I worked with sort of became the core of the company, which I guess officially was founded in probably 88 or 89 under a different name. Same group.
See, I wanted to ask because your structure is kind of like mine, but you've been doing it this way for a really long time. So it's not like you have to start here and then grow into something else. You can keep it going like at a smaller size for a long term. What about Invertigo Dance Theater? Sorry.
Yes. So Invertigo was created in 2007. So it's 13 years old. So we are now a teenager in that awkward teen phase of organizational life. We have an office staff of 7, including me and our founder and artistic director, Laura Carlin. We have, of that 7, 4 full-time. So we have a full-time operations associate that supports our accounting, our operational systems, takes the minutes of the meetings. And we have a full-time, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, so 4, we have a full-time community engagement director, who we're calling our creative engagement director, Kay Bradford, who is managing our community programs, our community engagement programs, and managing our community engagement interns and associates. And then we have a community engagement associate, intern, and a part-time development manager who's doing our grants. So that's our office team. We're all remote now. We've been out of the office since March, as so many others. So we have weekly, we do Google Meets and try and connect with each other as much as possible. We have dancers, Laura casts per project. So we have anywhere from 7 core dancers, for example, our Formula and Fairy Tale show that I described, up to our digital dance care packages, which are little care packages we make you can send to your loved ones, and we'll do a dance solo based on prompts that you want to send and themes and music to your loved ones, which has been a real hit during these pandemic times. And we had up to 15 dancers, I think, working on that at a time. So it's a range. Invertigo is unique in terms of Los Angeles dance in that all of our dancers are employees. So we pay them as employees, which creates a lot of additional costs, which we can talk about later if anyone wants to do that. But it also connects to the values that Laura had of wanting to give the dancers as many benefits as possible that come with being an employee. But we also have contracted people that we bring on board to projects, stage managers, production managers, videographers, graphic designers, and the like. Anywhere between, similar to Nancy's, 10 to more, depending on the project and the year. And our annual operating budget has grown over the years. It began at the same level, LJ, that you're talking about. That's where it begins, unless you're lucky enough to have a trust fund or an angel investor. That's where you start. And gradually it has grown up to the range of $500,000 annual operating revenues, because Invertigo is a nonprofit 501c3. And so we are considered mid-sized in this spectrum of dance organizations in Los Angeles County, the highest being multi-million-dollar budgets. And in the national spectrum, though, we are considered small. We're considered a small-sized dance company. So just to give you that range of perspective. And I'll quickly mention with Artist Magnet, I am the only employee for Artist Magnet. That is a for-profit arts organization. We're operating as an LLC, limited liability company. And we have a small board with that company, and we have mostly volunteers, as like with yours, and contractors, and our budget's a couple $1,000s a year. But we recently got some support for our Zoom conversations with casting directors and other leaders in the field, specifically Black women leaders in the arts field, to speak with emerging producers and artists in our community. And for that, we did get two grants, one $5,000 grant and one $2,500 grant. So we've like doubled our budget this year, which is exciting for us. But yeah, that's just to give you a sense of the comparisons of those two worlds.
That's wonderful. And I love that you're have the experience and the perspective of having like a large organization on one hand and then your passion project on the other hand, which is like, that sounds like two jobs to me, but more power to you. I can't imagine. I'm tired just from starting the one. I can't imagine what it's like to have to do both. So just two things. Before we started the live broadcast, I did ask both Nancy and David if they were comfortable sharing their annual budgets with the group. And David reminded me that annual budgets are public information. If you want to know how much it's actually costing for some of your favorite organizations to put on their seasons, you can go find that information. I don't remember what the website is, but everyone has to file a 990. And so that is public information. Really encourage everyone to go look into that, because you might be surprised at how much it costs to do 3 or 4 show season. And you can also start to think about, well, what do you think the biggest cost is? So we'll talk about that with both of our guests here in a little bit.
Yeah, and that's GuideStar. GuideStar is the number one resource that people usually use. Now I think they were taken over by Candid. So if you just do a Google search like GuideStar Candid, you can literally type in any name of any public nonprofit organization, arts organization, and we all have to show, like LJ mentioned, our numbers and how we're spending our money. So yeah.
Yes, and that's important too, because if you're applying for a grant and you need to know how much money to ask for, you can look and see how much it costs. Like you can say, this is my organization. Think of another organization that you can compare yourself to and then go look at their annual budget. That's kind of what I've been using it for, just to see, how much money everyone else is spending so that I can kind of anticipate what I would like for my budget to be going forward. So that's a really useful tool, GuideStar. Also before we came live, I told Dave that the biggest piece of advice I wish I would have taken was from him, where he was like, make sure that you have a really good board of directors, because your board of directors is a greater resource than you might think. So, got down to crunch time. I don't know anybody too fancy. So I was like, my mom, my partner. So I wanted to talk to you both about the role of the board of directors. So how many board of directors are on your various organizations? And just in general, what is the board of directors supposed to do for an organization? I'll open it up to either one of you, whoever wants to go first.
I'll jump for it, and Nancy, you piggyback on on what I miss. All right. Yes. Well, to a certain extent, it depends on the type of organization, which really starts with what is your mission and what impact do you want to have on your community and what do you want to use your organization for. There are many, many different types of models. I can tell you for us, I'll put on my Vertigo hat, in Vertigo Dance Theater. We currently have a board of 11, including Laura Carlin, who, as virtue of being the founder, is what they call ex officio board member. So not a generally non-voting board member. And we have 10 other board members, including 2 members of the Carlin family who have been on the board from the beginning. And just like you mentioned, LJ, that's how it starts. It was the fam that came on the board, and then it's grown from there. And so that is not atypical. That's generally how nonprofits will start. People that you know, who you're close to already, who love you personally or love your vision and mission of your organization. You will invite them to join your board. You're technically inviting them to be your boss. So that is something to know and be aware of, because there are responsibilities in law and also in best practice that comes with being a board member of a nonprofit organization, because the whole nonprofit structure is created. It's essentially a tax law. It was created by the government in order to give people a tax reduction for donating to the organization. So in return for getting that deduction, the organization had responsibilities to its community, and the board ensures that the organization is fulfilling those responsibilities. The primary one that a lot of people talk about, they call it fiduciary responsibility, and that essentially means is that you have to make sure that the money is being spent the way that you say to your supporters it is going to be spent in an ethical fashion. And you also have to ensure that the organization has enough funds to fulfill its mission so that it doesn't have to close its doors. That's really a primary responsibility of a board member. In addition to that, board members will typically be the guiding advisory support for the artistic director and the executive director, ensuring that everyone is staying on mission, as they call it. So if we've created this company to do dance, then if we're saying, oh, maybe we want to do something completely different other than dance, maybe we now want to become someone that's organization that supports people that are unhoused, or organization that supports animals. Okay, the board is there to say, okay, well, but remember, this is what your mission is. So are you going to change your mission? And so that's what we talk about when we say keeping on mission, doing what we originally intended to do. But I think that board members are volunteers. They do not get paid. So, and many times they have their own lives. So often it's really the relationship between the staff and board is very, very important. It's important for the staff to be the ones to provide the information on where the company is financially, where the company is programmatically, and be able to really be that connector between the artists and the audience, and present that to the board so the board could have a really good picture of where the organization is and how it's advancing, or if there are any issues, it's important for them to be notified so that they can address them. Real quick, I'll just talk about with Artist Magnet, I have a board there, very different. Because it's a for-profit arts organization, our board members are shareholders. So they have a share in the company, which means as our company makes money, their share increases, and they can actually, the value of their share increases. So they can actually sell their share and make money if one day we ever make money, which we're not right now. We hope to soon. But similarly, they have the same type of responsibility as ensuring that the organization is doing what it says it's going to do, and that that we are serving our community as intended. So yeah.
Nancy, what about critical mass?
Well, I am so glad that David said all that. That's because we do not have a board. We do not have a 501c3 designation. We have a fiscal sponsor, which is another way that you can do these things. If you want to allow people to donate money and get a tax write-off, you can have a fiscal sponsor, and then your donors can write off the donations to the fiscal sponsors, and the money goes to you. Usually the fiscal sponsor takes a percentage of the money, and then they are responsible for the funds, that the funds are spent properly. So we have to make an annual report to our fiscal sponsor, which is called Fractured Atlas. It's a national organization. I don't know if they're international. it's all online. They're based in New York, and they are, their mission is to support artists and allow artists to do their work. And so they take on the fiduciary responsibilities. I thought for many, many years or decades even that we would get our 501c3 status. And as the years went by, I realized that we were not doing it. I was not doing it, and that we seemed to be rolling okay without it. And because we don't produce very frequently either. We don't have a season. We don't have a whole lot of programs. All of our programs so far, I suppose there's always a future, but so far all of our programs are directly related to whatever project we're doing. So it started to not make sense to me to have that kind of infrastructure and to have to manage a board. We do have an advisory board, and those are people that from various disciplines, arts, as well as, law and finance, and my mom, who is also, you got to have your mom or, a close person, somebody who's just there for you all the time. But my mother is also in the arts, and she has she's been an executive director for many arts organizations. So she has, has a wealth of advice. But the advisory board are there for, great support in many ways. And I can call on them anytime to ask questions and get their advice. Mute.
Thank you so much. That is so important to point out, because the conversation today is the building blocks of an arts organization. And as David and Nancy have both now pointed out, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a nonprofit organization. Arts Magnet, for example, is a for-profit organization. And again, these are just tax designations. It doesn't really say anything about how much money the people involved are making, because you can look at a lot of these nonprofit arts organizations and the executive directors and the people in charge are making a lot of money. So, yeah, just know that these are tax designations. This doesn't necessarily speak to the actual amount of money that is coming in, but there's options to be for-profit. You could do nonprofit, which means that you are LLC, but you have a 501c3 tax designation from the IRS, which I tell everybody, if you want to do it yourself, costs like $600. And if you want to get someone else to do it for you, is even more. Or like Nancy, you could do fiscal sponsorship. That I think would be suited for people who are interested in doing a project-based model. So if you're kind of working on project to project, or like Nancy said, you don't necessarily have a season, that might be the better option for you. She mentioned Fractured Atlas. I know that Community Partners is a fiscal sponsor, and Statera Arts, I believe they also do fiscal sponsorship, if that's something you'd like to look into. So we did have a question from the comments. Someone wants to understand better the tax implications of not being tax exempt. Is there anyone that would like to address that?
I can, because we're not. I'm responsible for paying taxes on this. And so any money that does not go through Fractured Atlas is going to go through me, but ultimately I have to withdraw those funds from Fractured Atlas to use in our projects. And so I am responsible for all of that. And so I file a Schedule C when we do our taxes, and I write off, I have to write off everything that we spent, all of our expenses, and usually our expenses outweigh our income. So we don't usually have to pay taxes. It's basically, it's like money comes in, money goes out, and that's it. But yes, you would be responsible. You personally would be responsible for paying taxes on that money.
So when you had me driving around town with that blow up doll in my car for that one show, did you write that off on your taxes?
The doll?
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Do you have anything to add to that? Do you have anything to add, Dave?
No, Nancy's got it right on point. I only say for nonprofits, it's important for people to understand, and it's counterintuitive, but it does say tax exempt, but that does not mean we're exempt from taxes. Nonprofits still pay many different types of taxes. We're still paying sales tax. Actually pay all the taxes except for, as Nancy mentioned, that federal income tax. So if a nonprofit does bring in more revenues than expenses in a given year, normally that difference, there would be a tax on that. But for us as a nonprofit, there is not a tax on that. On the flip side, though, for our expenses, if our expenses exceed our income in the year, you cannot write that off as a business expense in the same way you can for a for-profit company. And we do our taxes every year, and we have to pay someone to do our taxes every year, just like everyone else. So yeah, that's a little bit what's funny about the nonprofit system. But yep, we pay taxes too.
Yes, and so from in my experience with Maroon Arts and Culture, I actually was talking to my mom a couple weeks ago about the 501c3. Mostly, I mean, if we're just being honest, I just hate that it costs so much money to get. I just to me, it just feels counterintuitive that I have to pay hundreds and maybe even over $1,000 to start a nonprofit venture. It's like, where am I supposed to get the profit to pay for that? So I think that just on a principle level, I just really hate the idea. But also, I'm just kind of in a place where I'm figuring out, is it even worth it? Especially with the way that our current environment is set up. I could stand on a soapbox all day and talk about how I feel like when it comes to individual donations, if you don't have a lot of rich friends, it might not be worth it, the extra step to ensure that their donations are tax deductible. I mean, if I'm getting $5 donations at a time, I just don't know if it's like, if the value proposition is there, like, oh, it's tax deductible for the $5 that you sent me. And I almost would rather there's a really great book by Adrienne Marie Brown called Emergent Strategy. Patricia Garza from Center Theater Group recommended that book to me. But it's this idea that you could almost have a community that was like more people. Like maybe I would rather get $5 from 1,000 people than $5,000 from one person. Because if that one person, something happens to them, then I have nothing. So I don't know. Now I'm going on and on, but like, these are the things that I think about when I try and decide whether or not I should just go ahead and get the 501c3. Or maybe I am only fiscal sponsorship, or maybe I'm a commercial producing venture. But right now we are LLC and as a nonprofit working towards 501c3 status, and hoping to get a fiscal sponsor so that we can apply for some grants. That's the other thing. If you want grants, you have to be, well, that's not necessarily true, Nancy, is it? You go through if you have a fiscal sponsor.
It totally depends on the funding organization. If you are applying for government grants, you have to have a 501c3. And so, for instance, we are not eligible for any government grants, not local, not state, not, LA County, LA City, California Arts Council, National Endowment for the Arts, any of those government grants we cannot apply for. I think we could if we had a local 501c3, although I looked into that as well. And because that was actually, I had thought about changing our fiscal sponsor to a local organization so that I could apply for local government grants. And they said, actually, you can't. So I didn't look into that, but I don't know what those implications are. Everything else we can apply for. And you can apply, in different ways. You can apply as an individual artist. As an individual, you don't have to have a fiscal sponsor or be a 501c3. If you apply as a company, you often do have to have a fiscal sponsor of some sort. Cornerstone Theater Company was our fiscal sponsor for 10 years. So, and that was a great relationship. And we, they would send whatever was necessary of the paperwork for that. But so there are many grants, national grants, funding organizations that do require a fiscal sponsor, but it doesn't. You don't have to have your own 501c3, and then there are many grants that you don't. Like I say, so there are lots of different ways of kind of approaching the fundraising and looking at where the money is coming from.
And
Yeah.
I'll just add that things are beginning to change as a lot of what they call philanthropic institutions are hearing the long overdue calls for cultural equity and racial justice in the arts ecosystem specifically, in addition to our broader society. They are beginning to prioritize making access to funding more inclusive. The structure, the nonprofit funding structure was set up in the mid 20th century by an exclusive elite group of people from a very
Mm-hmm.
exclusive demographic to benefit them in a very particular way. It was not created for those of us here in this virtual room. It was not created for our communities in general. And so we're in this exclusive system, which is actually really designed to exclude most people so that you can't get access to this funding, which is part of the reason why they have these requirements. Like you have to be a 501c3, you have to have an audit, you have to have this, you have to have all of that, all these, and chicken and egg, to your point, LJ, like you have to have money to actually request money. And now, as Nancy has mentioned, like they've begun over these past few decades to open things up to try and make it more inclusive. And now this year, they seem to be trying to accelerate within this rigid system to remove some of these obstacles. So California Arts Council, for example, has made moves to allow fiscal receivers, if the fiscal receiver is based in California because it's public funds, they have to do it that way, as Nancy mentioned, but also to reduce the match requirement, because with a lot of these grants as well, it was you have, if we're going to give you $5,000, you have to have another $5,000 coming from somewhere else,
Yes.
and that excludes a lot of our communities off the bat as well. So this is something that is not just happening inevitably. People are fighting and pushing these foundations and these government institutions to do this. So if this is something, and this area of advocacy interests anyone, definitely encourage you to attend board meetings of public arts funders, because they have to be public, many of them. And you can go and you can listen and see how they make decisions. I've been going to California Arts Council board meetings. It's fascinating if you're into all of this behind the scenes arts drama of how things get funded, and you can make comments and you can make suggestions. And the more we do that and push them to be more inclusive and support our communities, that's how change is going to happen, so that we can get more access to these funds.
Thank you so much for that confirmation, because for the past like 3 weeks, and Camille will tell you, because every time I pop on with her, I'm like, these are the barriers I'm experiencing this week. But yes, the way that the nonprofit world is structured, there are so many barriers to entry, and some of them seem very, harmless, but it makes it really hard for someone like me who's just really starting out and doesn't have a trust fund and just has a lot of people, like not even that many people, but a core group of people who believe in the mission and are supportive of it. And, I don't have $600 to give the IRS, not yet. So yeah, it is something I've experienced. Another barrier I've noticed is a lot of these grants require 2 years of programming in order to get funded. And then the question is, well, how do you fund those first 2 years of programming if you can't get funding until year 3? And yeah, I do. I know the California Arts Council had a town hall over the summer where they just opened it up to the public about any barriers people were experiencing on applying for grants. And I tapped into that one. I made a little speech. It was like 2 minutes. You only get 2 minutes. So I had to practice cramming in everything I wanted to say in a 2-minute time, but I did it. So yeah, hopefully it is going to start moving in another direction. And then, as Nancy mentioned, you can also apply as an individual artist. So that is an option as well. So if you're more project driven, you can look for funding as an individual artist. And I think that it's a little bit more flexible for the individuals in terms of a 501c3. So I wanted to talk to you about funding. So with your organizations of various sizes, what is your number one source of income as you like per year? What is your number one source of income? And what other sources of income are there even, if you wouldn't mind sharing?
Okay. Are you talking about income for the organization?
Yeah, for the organization. Is it grants? Is it donations? Is it?
It used to be grants, and it can be, but there was an organization called the Flint Ridge Foundation that had a one pot of money that they were giving to ensemble theaters, and they were one of the earliest supporters of ensemble theater, and a real advocate for that model. And so we were funded pretty regularly by them for, I want to say, 7 years maybe, and then they decided, until 2008, until the recession. And then during the recession, and this happened with a lot of funding organizations, they reimagined and restructured, and so they did away with their theater program. And I have found that to be a trend, that organizations that used to fund arts are no longer funding arts, and especially theater. And so it is, it's pretty slim pickings right now. So we have, individual donors, very small amounts of money come in through individual donors. And then I apply as an individual artist. And I wanted to sort of say, not everybody's an artist. So that's not an option for everybody to do. Mm-hmm. But if you are working with artists, those artists could apply for a grant for whatever project it is, but that money is going to go to that artist. You can't put that person out there and have them apply for the grant and then use it to, build a set. But you could use it to pay that artist. So that's what I'll say.
David?
I'll just piggyback off of that. Say California Arts Council also has for the first time this year, I think they've opened up to provide grants for individual artists. And that one is coming up in a couple of months. Before, it used to be you had to be an organization to apply. So in another sense in which they're trying to be responsive to the community needs, because one of the number one needs right now is that when the pandemic came down, a lot of artists, as you know, very, very few artists in our community in Los Angeles County are able to support themselves solely through their art. So they have to have second and third jobs to support themselves, especially if you're coming into this career. And a lot of times those second, third jobs are teaching and frontline service, which was the first to go in this pandemic. And so to be responsive to that, they are trying to be supportive. But for us, again, there's so many different models. We have organizations that are completely funded by the government in the arts, 100%. There are other organizations that are on the other side of the spectrum, completely supported by earned revenue, like selling stuff, selling products, and selling shows, selling merch. For Invertigo Dance Theater, our number one funding source actually comes from our board of directors. We are fortunate that we do have what they call a giving board, a fundraising board, and a board that has the capacity to give at a high level. And the board members give equitably. So we do have a give and a get requirement to join our board of directors. And so you give a certain amount, and then you also get fundraise through your friends and your colleagues a certain amount on behalf of Invertigo. And then beyond that minimum, if you have the means and additional resources, we encourage you to give more to whatever is a significant amount for you on an annual basis. And so between our entire board, that's almost 20% of our revenues. And that's really the backbone of what supports our staff. Our second biggest funding source is the government, still at this time. So California Arts Council, Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture, LACDAC, as they're known as now, Department of Cultural Affairs, City of Los Angeles, because we're based in the city. We also do projects in West Hollywood and Culver City. And so we get support from those municipalities as well. Third biggest is foundations. We are fortunate to be supported through the Parkinson's Foundation because of our Dancing Through Parkinson's program, and also small family foundations. One thing I didn't know is on some of these foundations, if you're on the board of the foundation, you get your own little pot of money that you can just spend on whatever you want. Isn't that nice? And so if you get to be friends with someone like that, they can actually direct the foundation to give the funds to your organization, even if under maybe normal circumstances, that foundation might not support you. And so that's actually how we were able, that was one of the ways. There were some other tools we used, but we were able to get support from the Ralph Parsons Foundation and the California Community Foundation to sponsor our fall soiree, which is our annual fall gala, which we did virtually for the first time ever last week. I was sharing with you all before the conversation, we use this same format, StreamYard, this online format we're using now, which is really cool formatting. And normally we would not have qualified for grants for that level of foundation. So that's another fun little info in terms of how the back end works. And then next we get commissions. And then we also, as Nancy mentioned, we get just love, even if it's $10 a month. We have what we call Invertigogo. So if you do $10 a month, you become an Invertigogo member, and we love you, and we'll give you a shout out. And so we have people giving everything from $1, $10 a month to a couple hundred, couple thousand. So yeah, so that's it. So it's all of the above strategy. And then I'll quickly say with Artist Magnet that because it's a for-profit, it's a different model. We actually have member subscriptions, so premium subscriptions that people pay $10 a month and they get full access to premium services on our site. So that's most of the way we get funding. And we also get funding from our stakeholders, our shareholders on our board. Because we're a for-profit, we cannot get donations in the same way as a nonprofit. Because you don't get that tax deduction, and you can't receive funds in that way unless you're doing like a benefit. You know, you'll see a lot of these type of like bike to support cancer or some good social initiative. Then with that, you can use volunteers and also receive funds on behalf of the charity. But other than that, it's about selling services. So we have to compete in the marketplace and have a product to sell. We also do consulting services that we do fee for service. And so that's how we're getting our money on the for-profit art side. But yeah, that's us.
Can I just add a couple things? That was amazing, David. I was like, making a lot of notes. No, what was so great is that it was so well organized.
Thank you, my dear. The ED mindset, just the gears turn once you get into that ED mindset, right?
And LJ I know, LJ, I don't want to jump your questions, but you did say like what are the roles, the most important roles of people that you would hire, and an executive director is number one. So and David. Just for that exact reason. But I just wanted to say, yes, the foundation, the private foundations, I did not understand this. We were given a grant from a family foundation because exactly what you're saying. So they were able to, people on their board are able to say, I want to give a grant to this organization or this person. Had no idea that was going on. And that was the David Lee Foundation. And it was like an incredible gift. And then the other thing is, the commissions, like CTG gave us a commissioning grant for our work in progress that we're doing right now. And so there are also, those relationships. I think smaller organizations and individual artists will have relationships with larger organizations who have pots of money for various things. And that we've been able to raise money that way and keep projects going that way, as well as through universities. And so a lot of times what we'll do is we'll fund a phase of development by doing a presentation or some sort of programming with another organization or university, and that will pay for that phase. So we did University of Redlands or Claremont, McKenna, or many, many different kinds of places. The Autry Museum, Skirball Center, Cultural Center.
Oh yeah, I love those guys.
Yeah. So museums, other cultural organizations, they have programming. They have money for programming, and so that's a way of, for us, it's been a great way of kind of keeping a project alive over a long period of time, is to set up different programming with other organizations.
I think that that's actually a piece of advice that I've gotten from both of you independently, is the importance of partnerships and strategic partnerships with Maroon Arts and Culture, because we're not grant funded at any level. We're not eligible for any grants because of the barriers to access. It's all basically founder funded, which means out of my pocket, individual donations. And then we have a couple of contracts, including this one with Center Theater Group as a co-producer of this series. As Nancy mentioned, Center Theater Group, they're a larger presenting organization. They have a larger budget. And so we can partner with them, and then the program budget becomes their budget. And so that's another way for Maroon Arts and Culture to kind of stay afloat, especially in a time when we can't really do too many shows. And because we're new, it's hard to get individual donations when you haven't done a public facing show yet. So there's that. I also just really want to point out to everyone that might be watching that neither one of our guests or myself mentioned ticket sales as a source of income. Just to highlight the point that if you are wanting to start an organization under any type of legal, or tax bracket, ticket sales may or may not be, let's just be real, ticket sales will not be your main source of income. And so you have to think about how you're really going to bring in money. I took a fundraising workshop over the summer with a woman named Amber Wynn. It was super informational, but she was talking about different revenue streams, whether it's corporate sponsorships, or if you have a physical location, a naming right, individual donations, grants, foundations. All of these things have to work together to fund your organization, because if something like a pandemic happens and you're only relying on grants, and now all of a sudden all the grant money is being redirected to COVID efforts, or if you're only relying on individual donations and it's an economic, recession, and now nobody has money to donate, then you'll be in trouble. So you really have to make sure that you are bringing in funding from various sources. I do want to ask you also one thing I am really, really bad at, which is why I wasn't able to take David's really great advice about the board, is making the ask. I'm not good at asking people for money. I'm not very good at asking people to volunteer for my organization. And I was wondering if you all had any advice on two things. One, how do you engage individual donors? And two, do you have any advice for making the ask of people to help you and support you? Because I know I ask Nancy for stuff all the time, but I'm always so awkward when I do it. I'm all like, Nancy, I'm sorry, I have to ask, I'm sorry. But do you guys have any advice for that?
Stop being awkward. I think people want to help. I want to help you, You help me also. I mean, even if you didn't, I would want to help you. I think people want to help if they see something that's worthwhile, that they resonate, that resonates with them, a person, a mission, an idea, an energy. There's a great thing that I heard somebody said, it's do it yourself with others. We can't do everything we can't do anything alone, right? It's always with others. And so I think it's about finding your people, finding the people who want to do that. People are looking for something to do. They're looking for a place to put their energy. And I'm with you. I'm terrible at asking, but I totally, I think it's so important to ask. You have to ask for what you want. And the thing that I always feel, and this is just like a gut answer. This isn't like anything you can really write down, but what's like the worst thing that can happen is somebody just says no, right? Like, so what? I know we all hate rejection, but oh well, I didn't have that help to begin with, so I still don't have it. And now there's another person. And then the other thing that, I've thought that I just saw, somebody was talking about one of the greatest sources of unhappiness is our sense of things being limited or finite. And I think we get in this mindset, like, and I know I do all the time, like, oh my God, Flint Ridge Foundation is gone. What am I going to do? Well, that was like 12 years ago, right? And so we've continued. If you have a mindset of, that possibilities are finite, it creates a lot of stress. But in fact, that's not the case. Possibilities are infinite, but we have to be creative and think about how to access them. And I think that's like right now so key is to generate the creative energy to access new resources, new sources of support for ourselves. And like we were talking about this platform, this StreamYard platform, and how we're all online right now. We have to, as creative people, figure out what that means for our work, not just fundraising. I don't know. So anyway, that's what
100%. Yeah, in Vertigo, and in more and more in my life practice, I'm trying to think of it in this way. We use the term abundance mentality versus scarcity mentality. And well, first I'll say this dirty little secret is it's awkward for everyone to ask. Like I love asking people for money, especially if they have money. If they don't, it's a little bit more awkward. But even with that, there's always that moment of like, oh, you don't, because you don't know how they're going to react. And you do have that fear of rejection. But my advice on top of what Nancy says was 100% would also be if you do find that that's something that's difficult for you and you're not comfortable with, then go out and seek out someone else for whom they like doing it and have them come with you. That's a lot of what I do as executive director, even though Laura as founder holds her own and she created the company from scratch and has no shortage of asks over the years to make her company happen. But the way we tag team together at, let's say, a meeting that we're having with a prospective board member or prospective donor works really great, because since I love being the one to ask them for money, and Laura is very comfortable and loves and is amazing at talking about her art because it's authentic and it's a passion that she's creating, that's how we do it. She talks about the art and then I go, and so you just heard this great art, so now $5,000 is how much it is to make it happen. Wouldn't you like to? And it works out great. So yeah, so if you don't want to do it yourself, get someone else to do it. It's all good.
So that's super important too. I if anybody out there is interested in development, y'all drop me a line, because I need help. I actually am really clear about the two areas where I need the most help, but I did want to ask this since both of you kind of referenced, but I'm just wondering if you had the budget to hire 3 people, like what are the 3 most critical roles that need to be filled? Like, obviously you don't have to have, full-time employees, as Nancy's shown us. She's been the sole full-time employee for a while now. So, but if you what are the 3 key roles that you think, I have the money to hire only 3 people, who am I hiring? What are your thoughts?
You want to go for this one, Nancy? You want me to start?
Well, I mean, I think, and it depends on who you are, right? So if you're the person who really loves raising money, but you're not an artist and you want to have an arts organization, that you might want to like partner with an artist. But if you're an artist and you want to do your art somehow, and I mean, I think an executive director, somebody who can manage, and David certainly will be able to speak much more clearly about what, his roles are, but, to raise the money and manage the structure of the company and, do the paperwork. And it's all of that stuff is so time consuming, and it requires a certain muscle, and not, I think I'm just barely functioning in that role. And I think that would be the first person I would hire. And then also for me, a producer, like a real producer.
What about you, Dave? What do you think?
Nancy's 100% right. It really depends on what your mission is, what impact you want to make on your community, what your values are, and what type of art that you are creating as the artist. I'm just assuming from the perspective of the artist, where do I start? Because there are models, especially in the theater world. Nancy knows there are many different models. You have your membership companies in which the members are the ones collectively and collaboratively running and managing the organization. You have the AD, artistic director, executive director model. I've seen models where you have multiple artistic directors and they all have like assistants and associates under them, but they are the driving force of the operations of the company and the fundraising and the art creation. So I think the structure will change and the priorities will change depending on what you want to do. But from the perspective of having an organization, right? And it doesn't matter whether it's for profit or nonprofit, in my opinion. If you want to create your own company and run a company, then I believe the first position really is development. And I know that will annoy some people, but a company, this is the way our society has been structured. From my vantage point, a company has to be able to sustain itself financially so that you can serve the community, so that you can create the art. And people that are trying to create the art without the finances, it's not only is it very frustrating for them, but it's a block. It's just an inhibitor for them to actually fulfill their mission if it's not prioritized. So I know especially in many of our communities, there is a tense and mixed relationship with money and with acquiring money and with how money is used. Mostly, I think, again, because of historically the way the system has been set up to exclude people and to make people what I heard in a really great quote, and I'm sorry, I can't credit it, that money and wealth being an antigen to a community. So the idea that some communities were pitted against each other in a way that people were brought up to believe if you invest money in this community, it's gonna like be the worst investment ever. And it's actually gonna be worse to give them money than if you didn't at all. So don't support this community. And we're living through the remnants of that system. So yeah, it's very, very, that gives people a complicated relationship to it. But if you want an organization, that's the priority you want for the good, so that you can do this great art that you want to do.
Yeah, I think that if I were to, I've got some grant applications due in the next couple of weeks, and one of them allows for operating funds, which, just for the general knowledge of people watching, unrestricted grant funds are kind of like unicorns in the grant world, from what I understand. This idea that they'll give you tens of thousands of dollars for whatever you need it for. And so I was thinking, well, what would I do with that money? And the two areas where I feel like I need the most support are development, number one, because I am not a grant writer. Now, Nancy is a great grant writer. I mean, Nancy, yes, you are. Nancy writes grants. I'm not that great at it. My only experience writing grants is from when I was teaching and getting funds for my kids to go on field trips and stuff like that. But it's a whole nother ball game. When it comes to arts grants, it's very in the know. There's a lot of details and things like that. So I definitely would love some support in development. And another area where I feel like I'm just not really struggling is marketing, because I'm a person that has a producer mindset. I like to produce things, and I'm also an artist. But once the idea has been ideified, I'm like, how do I tell people about it? So that's kind of one area where I also need help. So development and marketing are those two areas where, you know, you don't need somebody who has a theater background for those two. But if somebody with a theater background were interested in fundraising, or was like, if you're a person like David and you like asking people for money and you also are passionate about theater, consider a career in development, because you can still support art and make sure that good art gets made. And while also leaning into your strengths and doing what makes you feel confident and doing what you enjoy. And same thing with marketing. You know, you can be an artist and still want to work in a corporate environment or work for a large organization, or maybe you're a person that is really more all about business, more so than you are an actor or something like that. There are opportunities out there for people of all personality types. And as I was sharing with our panelists before we came on, that's what I like about this series, because I'm a theater kid that does not like to act. I'm a theater person that's not an actor. And so I always felt like it wasn't until later on in life, once I was going through grad school and all these other things, that I started to realize that there are career options out there for people like me. And there are ways that I can be involved in theater and still be helping with art and still be at rehearsals and, you know, doing all the things that we theater people love to do without necessarily having to be on stage in front of people. So I definitely encourage everyone to think outside the box. There's a place in the theater world for everyone. One thing I wanted to ask both of you is, about physical location, right? I mean, the old school model of starting a theater is you go out, you get yourself a little black box or something like that. So do either of you have a physical location, and what are the pros and cons?
Sure, I'll go first with that. So we do have a physical location for our office in Culver City. We last I checked, Laura Cardlin, my artistic director, we were on a Zoom together, and she showed me the office, and she converted it into a dance studio. Our office. So we put down the flooring, you got the curtains. So I think now we have a dance studio. But typically, no, we are what they call nomadic. So we rent spaces throughout the city to have rehearsals for our dance and theater productions. And then when I talked about commissions earlier, we were referring to being presented. So the reason that ticket sales is not a big part of our package is because we will pitch a company, a theater, to give us a contract and bring us in to do the show. The theater charges tickets to their patrons, you generally within a subscription, and right, an annual subscription season, and there's all different types of models, but generally the theater gets to keep those ticket sales. So that's from them. We don't see any of that money. We just get that flat free fee from the theater. So that's typically the way we do it. Again, I feel like I'm going to be a broken record here, sorry, but I think that there's no right or wrong way. It really should start with what type of art you're creating, what your mission is, what impact you want to be on your community, and who your community is, to dictate whether you should have a space or not. Because I've seen very successful models with companies that have spaces and don't, and then I've also seen companies fail that have spaces and don't. We can talk about the pros and cons of having a space and having to pay a lease and all the government regulations and contracts and everything that comes with having a space. But I think at the end of the day, it makes sense if the type of work that you're creating and the type of impact you want to have on your community demands that you need a space for that community to create that art. Then yes, that's the track for you, and then it's just about how to make that happen. But if not, then you don't need a space. you shouldn't just get a space just because you're seeing other companies get a space. If your community is more about affiliations from different places, if it's more about interactions like we're having, and you're excited about creating art on these types of platforms, or if it's about exploring different places and different communities, different sites, then that's the model for you. So yeah.
Nancy, what are your thoughts on a physical location?
Yeah, the dream always was to have a great old space, that we would convert from a warehouse somewhere, and it would have a community space and a cafe and a performance space and, books and art. And so that's always been the dream. And I thought for many years, oh, we'll have a space, and actually not that many years. This was a pretty quick decision. I realized that for us, because we do not produce very frequently at all, like only really every few years, it did not make sense for us to have a space. That having a space would turn us into landlords, and and I was just watching different organizations basically put all of their resources into the physical plant, and how much money they had to raise, from small theaters to big theaters, to maintain the space, just to keep the lights, keep everything working, and pay all the bills, and then you have to start renting it out because you're not using it, you're not bringing in money, so you need to somehow pay the rent and pay the bills. So then you start having to rent it out, and then you become, then that becomes your job, which, maybe that's okay. Maybe that's a good way to make money for your company. I don't know, but it didn't make sense for us. And actually, we also travel, Southern California and Los Angeles, the city and the county, and it's been such an enriching experience, to be able to perform in all different parts of our community and meet so many different people, and inhabit many different kinds of spaces, gyms and libraries and museums and theaters and warehouse spaces. And so that's all part of, it's part of the art, it's part of the connecting with community. And so that has felt really vital to us. It doesn't mean it's easy, because you're constantly having to look for space. And when I started, one of the reasons why I came back to Los Angeles was that it felt very open in terms of that. It was so much cheaper than so many places, especially New York, which is where many people wanted to go. And I thought, actually, for what I want to do, I think Los Angeles makes more sense. But it's become so expensive now. Space is so expensive and at such a premium that, again, there's a lot of resources, energy and money that goes into space, no matter what. And sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
There were a lot of spaces that we used to use that are no longer available. It's the same with funding,
Mm-hmm.
It's just not as open.
I really liked what you were saying about like not wanting to become a landlord, because you're right. If you are not producing, in order to sustain a physical location, you have to rent it out whenever it's not in use. And then, that's your job, as you're a property manager. So I would assume that if you had a physical location, that would probably be your number one expense. But neither one of you has a physical location. And so I'm just wondering, like, what is your biggest annual expense? Where do you spend most of your money annually?
Okay, you want me to go first? You want to go first, Nancy?
It's our artist fees. We spend a huge, the majority of the budget goes to people.
That's good. Same for you, David?
Well, when you mentioned, I was thinking, I'm wondering, if we were to get a space, depending on where, if we were to get a space in Culver City, which is as expensive as Nancy is talking about, or maybe more.
Yeah, plus I'm apartment shopping, so yeah.
Yeah. then yeah, it would probably be our largest expense. But I think actually it might not be our largest expense, even if we were to have a dance studio space, because by far our largest expense is our staff, as you
Yeah.
might be able to imagine. All you have to do is think about the math of our annual operating budgets and how many staff we have that are full-time and part-time, and you can see that most of the expenses are our people, especially in addition, as I mentioned before, making the choice to classify our dancers as employees and our actors and our artists as employees is not as simple as it sounds. There are taxes. There are taxes that they have to pay. There are taxes that we have to pay. Then there's a thing called workers' compensation that you have to get, which generally companies that provide it, and that's if you get injured on the job, you get support. It's like an insurance for that. Uh, they will not take a company like ours. They will not take a theater or dance company because it's too risky. So essentially, we've all been sent to the monopoly of the California state government's workers' comp, and these people are not artists, and they don't understand artists. So we try to explain them what our artists are doing, and they classify us into these ridiculous, expensive classifications. So it's a lot. That's by far most of the expense. But ironically, what I've seen with a lot of organizations is the larger you grow, the larger those expenses are. To Nancy's point, you end up spending a lot of your time not doing the art. You end up spending a lot of your time keeping the operations going, keeping the funding going. And then if you have a space, then again, to your point, you're the property manager and the landlord. But it is necessary to do that so that you can create the art that you want to create. So in terms of, yeah, most of us, of the staff, on our day-to-day basis, we are not participating in the creation of the art. And in a lot of the meetings, we're talking about it and talking around how to make it happen, but we're not actually doing the thing. But if we all weren't there, then Laura wouldn't be able to do the thing. So it becomes part of what they call the cost of doing business.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's why that's our largest expense by far.
Yes. So that means for both of our guests, people, right? Generally, people are the largest expense. Whether it's artist fees or, as David mentioned earlier, he's got quite a few full-time staff members, including his artists, which is really great because typically artists are treated on like a 1099 basis. I guess, on a 1099. We could talk about AB5, but I'll come back to that if I have time. Although I wanted to ask both of you about unions. You all both employ union artists? Do I remember that correctly? No.
Well, we may, some of our artists, I believe, probably are part of some unions, but we are a non-union organization. Dance is a little different than theater. Nancy can speak to theater, but we're non-union. Our projects are non-union, and then so taking my Invertigo hat off and putting my artist magnet hat on, I'm a non-union producer. I don't do union projects. So the artists that are with me are not on union contracts with my projects. Now, they may be parts of unions, like you have SAG-AFTRA for film, you have Actors Equity, there's different types of unions that they may be a part of, but the work that I do is always not within the union jurisdiction. Yeah.
Nancy, what about you?
We have union and non-union, and we follow union rules. And, depending on where we are, the actors are able to get on better contracts. If CTG produces one of our shows, then they're on a really great Actors Equity contract. And right now there's a lot of confusion, I think, about what's happening in the digital realm, which I'm just starting to catch up to. So I'm not able to really speak to that, but between the unions, who has jurisdiction over what will be happening on your screen?
I just know it's an added expense when you do bring on union artists. In our organization, a lot of the actors and actresses that we work with are currently not union, but are hoping to become union in the next few years. And so as a business owner, I've just kind of been thinking about like how that might affect you know, my ability to pay them and to keep up with them. I was wondering too, Camille actually brought this up, but how much of your time, let's just say percentage wise, when you're at work, which, you know, we all know is like at your house, do you spend on fundraising and grant writing? Is that like a big part of what you do, or is it, how much time do you spend on that?
Uh, I haven't worked it out. I bet David has, but it can be a lot, you know, depending on the grant. I spend a lot of time writing grants. I can spend, you know, 40 hours on a grant. I'm probably doing it wrong if it's taking me that long, but it just is extremely time consuming. And some grants have phases. So you do, you know, like initial letter of inquiry. And then if you make it to the next cut, you know, that already takes some time. Then you make it to the next cut and it's just exponential, the amount of hoops that you jump through. I think, you know, cultivating donors and searching for sources of money is just sort of ongoing. In terms of percentage, I mean, I feel like most of my time is spent on the art, but probably in an objective universe, but it feels like my time is spent doing the other thing.
That's how I feel too. I'm like, man, remember when I did this because I had a dream of making stuff?
Yeah.
What about you, David?
Yeah, I was joking with Nancy. I said I have it down by the percentage, Nancy, by the percentage point to the 10th decimal. No. I have no idea. I would be able to calculate because in addition to what Nancy's saying, grants, we jokingly call it grant season, which is now really like all year. But there used to be like back in the day, in my days, in the 2000s, that there was like a season. So you would have the year, it'd be pretty chill, maybe a grant or two here, and then like 5 grants would be due, 10 grants would be due on the same month, and people would just go crazy. So if you'd probably have to average it out the whole year. It does come in waves. I'm now in a position within Vertigo Dance Theater where we are very fortunate to have a part-time development manager who way over 50%, and almost all of her job is to write the grants. So we essentially have an in-house grant writer. She's also a very valued member of the collaborative team. So she's involved in staff meetings. She's helping brainstorming on art and programming. So she's part of the team. Her name's Chelsea Sutton. She's awesome. And she also, because she's part-time with us, she has other lives in other companies that she works with in LA. But yeah, that's her primary job with us. And so, but still there's a lot of time in terms, because grant writing is a collaborative process when you have multiple team members. So we need to know what the concept is. And so Laura gets involved. I do the budget sections. We have our community engagement associate do as our marketing and PR, because a lot of these grants will ask for a work sample. And they want it high quality and edited, right? And they want images. And so it's between everyone, it ends up being, to what Nancy mentioned, up to 40 hours, depending on the grant, of collective work. I'll just quickly say, for just the day and what I am spending my time doing, it's very fascinating. And I don't know if this is true for larger organizations like Center Theater Group. I assume it might be more closer to their world, but a lot of my time I really have become a manager. So most of my day is supporting the staff so that they can do what they need to do for the organization. So I'm getting like 100 emails a day, and a lot of it is our operations associate, Sana, needs some support, Kay needs some support, Chelsea needs support, checking in with Laura, checking in with Rosa, just making sure like everybody's cool and everyone knows what's going on, and everyone knows what the tasks are, and if anyone needs help, I help them. And that is literally more than half of all of my days. So it's fascinating, because when I started with my first job, it was just me. Like similar to Nancy, my first job was at Watts Village Theater Company in South LA, and I was managing director, and we had an artistic director, and it was just us. And now here I have this staff, and now I'm like that guy from The Office, I guess. I'm like the manager. Ah. But I see myself as I do. Of course, I definitely do my share of a lot of the paperwork, but I do feel primarily that I am here to really support and empower the team to do their best work for the company.
That's awesome. I love that. So, if anyone has any questions, feel free to share them in the chat before we wrap it up. I wanted to ask you both. So, let's say you're an artist and you have an idea for a project. You feel very passionate about this project and you want to get it made. What's the first thing you should do you think, in your opinion? Do you get yourself an LLC? Do you find someone to help you make it? Like, what's the first step in, like, if an artist wants to make a project happen?
I think it totally depends on what the project is. You know, if the project is I want to start an arts organization, that's way different from I want to put up a show or make a dance piece. You know, one piece.
Give me both. I mean, my question was if you wanted to put up a show or something like that, but give me both, and then I'll see if I did it right. Like, I'll see if I did the first thing I was supposed to do when I started my organization.
Oh gosh, you know, it just totally depends on who you are in your organization and in you know, in that in the scope of the piece. If you're the instigator of the piece, the director or the producer, or I'm an actor and I want to be in a play and I want to do this play, now I have to find a director and designers and a space and blah, 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 blah. I mean, I think the first thing to do is just define what exactly what is it? What's the vision for it? And then what's it going to take? Like on like a really nuts and bolts level, you know? And if you have a partner, somebody who is interested as well, it really helps to have somebody to brainstorm with and talk about division of labor. And, you know, I think money is important. I guess I would say it's not important to incorporate. If you want to do a show, do a show. You don't need to incorporate. It's very easy, actually. I think producing, I don't think I'm great at it, but it's like a checklist of stuff, you know?
Yeah.
And so the harder thing is the actual creative work.
Yeah.
Making sure that that has integrity and, you know, you're able to accomplish your vision. And I think what David was saying is, like, in order to do that, you do need certain kind of resources. But I don't think you need like an official tax, you know, designation.
Kind of start where you are, kind of thing.
Exactly. Start where you are. You will need money.
Oh, good, because that's my motto with this whole organization.
Start where you are. I think that should be the motto for everything. You're always somewhere, you know. Just some things have more zeros attached.
Anything to add, David? Any advice for people out there who either have an idea to start an organization or have a project they're passionate about and they want to get off the ground?
Yeah, just again off the top of my, I don't know if this is right or wrong answer, might make people not happy or happy. Apologize in advance, but just what comes off the top of my head, in addition to what Nancy said, which is Nancy's 100%. If you so my first advice would be, if you have an idea you're really passionate about, create a second one. If you don't have it already, have another idea. Because, and that's going to prep for what I'm about to say about your first idea. And then you go back to your first idea and do actually, well, LJ, we were talking about how we met, how you and I met. And I think what you did was not only very smart, but I think really in line with my understanding of your values and your mission, which is you just went around and talked to people about your concept and asked for feedback from a bunch of different people. And that would be my real advice, similar to what Nancy's saying about the creative process. I really believe that when we talk about community and we're talking about creating within community, some of the most successful projects that I've seen out there, the artist, artistic director, before they even decide to do the project, they surround themselves with people who they really care about, who are from the community that they care about, who they respect as mentors, and they say, here's what I want to do. Should I do this? How should I do this? And then they invite them, will you do this with me? Will you make this happen with me? And I really, I think that I really encourage people to do that, as opposed to just saying, in myself, I want to make this thing, so I'm just going to make it because I know it's the best idea. I don't need to hear anybody else's opinion about it. You can do that, and I've seen success there too, but the real fulfilling projects I've seen have been done really in tandem with the community. And so then that leads to the second point. I'd say, if what you hear back from your mentors in that circle is that this is not what you should be doing, then be prepared to let that go. Be in a place where you're able to let that go and have another project. Or if you really feel in your heart that this needs to happen, do it anyway. But I believe going through that process first is really important, because sometimes within that process, it reveals what you hear back from your community, and your support system reveals an even better idea that you hadn't thought of at the first point. So that's
Yes.
a little bit of 2 cents.
So start where you are and be open to feedback is kind of what I'm hearing. Yeah. Make sure that you are not creating in a vacuum, because we all know what happens when somebody writes all of their own scripts themselves for TV, and then it turns out not so great. That's a wonderful way, I think, for us to end our panel today. I just want to say thank you again to both of our guests, Nancy Keystone and David Mack. We so appreciate you being with us. We really got some super valuable information. I know Camille and I have just kind of been geeking out in the chat, because this is all so good, and it's information that people don't really talk about enough. So thank you both so much for being with us here today. To those of you who are watching, thank you so much for tuning in. I have a little assignment for our participants. I would encourage you all to identify organizations and artists whose work you admire, and go to their websites, see who's on their board of directors, see what their organizational structure is, see who worked on their last event, and maybe even go to GuideStar and see what their annual budget is, so that as you all start to build your own empires and things like that, you can model yourself after people who are already doing it. I mean, I know when I was a teacher, the number one rule was to just steal from other teachers, because that's how you get the good stuff. So I just encourage you all to take that energy with you as you start your organizations. So thank you again to everyone. And next week we will be talking to Patricia Garza from Center Theater Group, and Liana Keys, they are both producers. So it's the producers panel next week. We're going to talk about what it takes to be a producer, what is a producer's job, the many different roles that they play and the hats that they wear, and maybe even find out if some of us are meant for that producer life and don't even know about it. So tune in next week. And we're also going to talk about now versus pre-COVID. So it should be really interesting. I'll see you all next Friday. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.